is no caravan of despair. Come yet again, come. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lovers, and leaving roses, your carols and ours despair. Though you come yet again, come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, carols and lovers, and leaving though you broken your vows and vows despair. Broken your vows and vows this time. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lovers of leaving roses, no caravan of despair. Broken your vows and vows and times. Though you come, come, whoever in times. Though you've broken your vows, your lovers and times. Though you've broken your vows and vows this time. Though you've come, yes, and vows and times. Though you've come, whoever in times. Though you wander, vows and lovers and leaving horses, no carols and no despair. Though you come, yes, again, thousand times. Though you come, come, whoever you are. Though you broken your vows and lovers and times. Though you broken your vows and vows despair. Though you come, yes, again, thousand times. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lovers of leaving horses, no caravan of despair. Come yet again, comes. Whoever you are, we welcome you. Wherever you come from, we welcome you. Whomever you love, we welcome you. Whoever you are, we welcome you. Wherever you come from, we welcome you. Whomever you love, we welcome you. Whoever you are, we welcome you. Wherever you come from, we welcome you. Whomever you love, we welcome you. Whoever you are, we welcome you. Wherever you come from, we welcome you. Whomever you love, we welcome you. Whoever you are, we welcome you.
Welcome, welcome all to this Sunday service of the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Charleston, West Virginia. On this last day of February, spring is coming, dear ones. This week we could see it in the crocuses and snowdrops, smell it in the air. In the words of my colleague, Reverend Sharon Wiley, the days are growing longer, hallelujah. More sunshine to lift our spirits, though not today, it's currently raining, along with the good news of more vaccinations. At last, we may be feeling hope, not just fear. At last, we may be able to see good times ahead, not just hard times. In the season of tentative optimism, cautious happiness, we gather together in friendship with shared values to worship together again. I am the Reverend Caitlin Cotter Coilberg, minister of this congregation, and I am joined for this service today by Worship Associate Kate Jordan, by our tech volunteer Neil Chakrabarty, and virtual usher Matt Connolly. Music for today's service is mostly by our own music director, Hannah Clark. You heard a version of Come Come, Whoever You Are by the Reverend Abby Tennis. And then we have one music video today from Thami Snell, music director of one of our Rochester Unitarian Universalist congregations. So thank you, Thami, for sending that to us. And our Time for All Ages story today comes from the fabulous Reverend Misha Sanders with Titles and Images by Laura Thompson. We are so grateful in these times for the gifts that are being shared between our congregations. We're going to begin today with this video from SOAR, our Share the Plate recipient for this month. So Neil and Matt, can you throw that up?
The heart of SOAR is changing hearts and minds. Changing hearts and minds is where we start to undo some of the stigma and some of the misunderstanding and some of the hate that we have for people who use drugs.
And so for each one, you're going to pull it up all the way and inject it into their leg. Big muscle. Okay? Wait a couple of minutes. If it doesn't work, do it again, just like with the nasal.
SOAR
has resumed our street outreach, and our street outreach includes, right now includes winter clothing, snacks, syringe exchange, safer sex products, safer use products. We have a doctor on site for wound care, and we have recovery coaches if people want to talk about getting into recovery. And then, of course, clean syringes.
Charleston's experiencing an HIV crisis, and a hepatitis crisis, and an overdose crisis that we've never seen before. That the level of suffering that people have right now is epic proportions. This is a huge time of need for so many people. We talk a lot about mental health and people struggling with mental health in this pandemic, and now more than ever, we need all of the resources we can get to keep people safe.
Everything that they do here has a purpose in terms of protecting health, and that means protecting people against HIV and hepatitis C because they don't have to share syringes if they have enough. They don't have to reuse syringes, which means they're not going to get bacterial infections or endocarditis, which is a really serious infection of the heart valves and the heart lining. And we did actually have a few people here today talking about, because they haven't been distributing syringes for the past 6 weeks or something, people have been seeing a lot more abscesses because people are having to reuse the syringes that they have. They can't get new sterile ones. The science is unequivocal. Like, these services protect people from all the things that I just talked about. Scientifically proven. When you start programs like this, you don't have increased crime in the community or in the surrounding neighborhood. You don't have increases in discarded syringes in the surrounding neighborhood and the community. A lot of the syringe programs that I've worked with actually take in more syringes than they distribute.
When I was growing up, my dad talked a lot about agape love and this idea that we love people no matter what, and we love people through things. So when I think of harm reduction, I think of the work that we do here. I think of agape love, and harm reduction is that one thing that really pushes people to really learn how to practice loving people and meeting them where they're at. Like, the only way we're going to make it through this is by loving people through it.
We're going to continue bi-weekly outreach. We're going to continue as we were before, continue to attempt to have conversations with the city and with the state and be as compliant as we can, and still, be accountable to the people that we serve.
And I will say, I finally got to go out and spend a whole Saturday afternoon with SOAR and the SOAR volunteers. And it is just amazing the work that they're doing, and the love that flows there, and the generosity of the people who come through too. I remember talking to Joe. I was talking to someone who was wearing 2 sweatshirts, and Joe was like, "Nice sweatshirts." And he's like, "Oh yeah, I always wear an extra in case somebody else is cold." So this is the kind of community that the love we're trying to be a part of. So we invite you at this time to pull out your checkbook or your PayPal app or to queue up the donation page on our website and to give generously to support the work of SOAR and of this congregation. Your generosity is what keeps us going. Remember to grab a candle for our chalice lighting moment. We invite you each week to light a candle when we light the congregation's chalice, when Kate will read our chalice lighting words later. And speaking of generosity, I believe Deborah Beatty is here to talk to us about stewardship. Deborah?
Usually when we talk about stewardship within the confines of a congregation like ours, it often comes down to asking for financial generosity and support. And for sure, we really need generous support and generous pledges to do what we need to do. But due to the traumatic aspects of the past year, the pandemic, the loss of important friends and family, the extreme polarization in our society, which has descended into violence, I want to mention an additional aspect of stewardship today, and that is connection with those who are important in our lives. In this case, each other, family, friends, and fellow congregants, and those who are not yet important to us, but with whom it's important to communicate. I'm going to read just a little quote to you from a psychiatrist who's named Bessel van der Kolk. He is an expert and researcher in trauma and what happens to people in their bodies and in their lives when they undergo traumatic situations. We are going through a long-term traumatic situation. We're never away from what we're having now. What he says is social support is the most important protection against becoming overwhelmed by stress and trauma. Social support is not the same as merely being in the presence of others. The critical issue is reciprocity, being truly heard and seen by the people around us, feeling that we're held in someone else's mind and heart. For our physiology to calm down, heal, and grow, we need a visceral feeling of safety. No doctor can write a prescription for friendship and love. These are complex and hard-earned capacities. And that's from his book, The Body Keeps the Score, which deals directly with trauma. I encourage each of us as a part of our stewardship to reach out with others, to people we don't know, to people we do know within the congregation. It's been a long, lonely year for many people. So encouraging you to do that. If you need phone numbers, contact the office and you can get those. So have a good day.
Thank you, Deborah. And I invite those of you who are with me on Zoom right now to take a minute, switch over to gallery view so we can wave hello to each other. I remember you can also hold up the American Sign Language for I love you, or just indicate that we're hugging each other across the distance. Steve, Angie, Sheila, oh, Patty, hey, Patty, Laura, Paul, it's so good to see your faces and so good to know. Penny, hi, so good to know. And I invite you to type into the chat box or into the comment section on Facebook your hellos and your answer to the question, what has brought you joy this week? Where have you found joy this week? So good morning, dear ones. I know I have been getting joy every time I hear about someone else getting vaccinated. I know, Deborah and Angie, I got to see you at the SOAR event last week and you were like, oh yes, and we're vaccinated now. And I was just like, hallelujah, right? Kate, yes, what a joy that you get to be back doing the job that you signed up for, right? Being in the room with students. Yeah, good morning, Neil. Good morning, all. And feel free to keep typing in your joys in the chat box. And Kate, I'm going to invite you to start us off with that opening reading.
Today's opening words are by Nathan Ryan. Be it real or metaphor, whatever is in your backpack or your briefcase, or your purse that you have brought into this virtual sanctuary that is weighing you down. Leave it behind. Whatever you are carrying that is keeping you distracted or caught up in shame or guilt or hopelessness, leave it behind. If you need it, it will be there when we're done. But for this hour, just let it go. Come into this place with open hearts. Come into this place with a soul that has remembered how to be tender again. Come into this place with a renewed hope for this world. Come into this place ready to build a world we've always been worthy of and have always dreamed of. And now I invite you to sing our first hymn with us, Love Will Guide Us.
Love will guide us, peace has tried us, hope inside us will lead the way on the road from me to thee. Love will guide us through the hard night. If you cannot sing like angels, if you cannot speak before thousands, you can be found deep within you. You can change the world with your love. Love will guide us, peace has tried us, hope inside us will lead the way on the road from me to thee. Love will guide us through the hard night.
Today's chalice lighting words are by Andrew Pikula. In sightless night, terrors draw near, nameless fears of talon and tooth. Hopelessness yawns before us, an abyss, alone and unknown in the gloom, longing for the dawn. O sacred flame, blaze forth, wisdom brought to life. Guide us with the light of hope, the warmth of love, the beacon of purpose and meaning, because we are all afraid of the dark. Let there be light.
I'm Misha Sanders, and this braver, wiser reflection is called Red Bubble Letters. My sister had just taught me how to make bubble letters, which I thought would surely impress all my friends. So, before all the other children arrived, I drew and meticulously colored in big, wobbly red letters, God is love, on the green chalkboard in my kindergarten Sunday school classroom. Not long into class, after all the children had arrived and pretty much ignored my artistry, one of my all-time favorite teachers picked up an eraser and began to swipe over the dusty old board, much to my dismay. But I was even more dismayed that my artistic creation did not seem to be fading, despite her vigorous attempt. Mysterious. Miraculous, perhaps. Turns out that red chalk that was, in my defense, on the chalk tray was actually a stumpy little red crayon. The tears started, as I recall, right about the time friends began whispering that I was definitely in big trouble. I was as mortified as a 6-year-old can get. I was mortified, that is, only until that beautiful, wise Sunday school teacher scooped me into her arms, and in a clear moment of amazing grace, I heard her deep alto laugh in my ear, and she said, "Oh, no, no one is in trouble. Don't you see, dear children, this is just perfect. What can erase God's love? Nothing. She ended the warm hug with a squeeze and then gleefully picked up a piece of white chalk and began quickly writing around my unintentionally semi-permanent crayon art all of the things that we could think to yell out that might make us feel unlovable in the eyes of God. Lying, cheating in school, cussing, hitting your brother, cutting in line for the slide, chewing gum in church. It was a lot for kids, those conservative religious rules in the 70s. But then with dramatic flourish, she again picked up the dusty eraser and wiped it all away, leaving only God is love. God is love in big wobbly red bubble letters. It is my only memory of a lesson from kindergarten Sunday school class. And maybe it's the only one that counts. Here's a prayer. Spirit of love, when we try hard but make a mess anyway, because we are all only precious children after all, may we remember to laugh, hold each other close, and marvel at the truth that remains, which in the end is only love.
Please join me now in singing our next hymn, What Wondrous Love Is This? What wondrous love is this, oh my soul, oh my soul? What wondrous love is this, oh my soul? What wondrous love is this that brings my heart such bliss and takes away the pain of my soul, and takes away the pain of my soul. When I was sinking down, when I was sinking down, when I was sinking down beneath my sorrow's ground, friends to me gathered round, oh my soul, friends to me gathered round, oh my soul. To love and to all friends I will sing, to love and to all friends I will sing, to love and to all friends who pain and sorrow met, with thanks unto the end I will sing, with thanks unto the end I will sing.
I now invite you to join me in reading our unison affirmation. Love is the spirit of our faith, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Big, deep breaths when you're nervous. I'm a little nervous today. Good morning. This is, there's several ways I thought about opening this reflection. Phrases, lines from poems and metaphors, and my mind rolled around in thoughts. But then last evening, enjoying my Saturday, I found myself watching a true crime show. As the police officers were describing the killer, and as the drama was reaching its peak, one officer said to another, "This guy is bad. He's evil." I paused the show at that point and wrote down the quote. Earlier in the day, I had seen a post on Reverend Caitlin's Facebook page discussing this very word, a deep, enriching discussion on the nature of the difference between evil and sin. I did not comment on the post regarding the subject matter, but found it ironic that just this week I had spent a whirlwind of teaching and lecturing on word choice and connotation. I inquired if the Facebook group chiming into the post had been eavesdropping on my lessons. As I explained to my students this week, word choice and the words we use matter. Our chapter was called The Impact of a Word, and I kept telling the students how appropriate that was. The impact of a word. Is it evil, sinful, cruel, bad, wicked, vile, malevolent, immoral? All of these words are synonyms, but their connotation, that is, the ideas and feelings a word evokes, can be quite different. How they are used in a sentence can change the most subtle of meanings. Was the Night Stalker evil or immoral? Was he cruel and sinful? I gather the victims of this man's damage would say he was all of those things. Christianity teaches that no matter how vile an individual, we love them. No matter their sins, a Christian is told to hold that person in their heart and pray for them. Jesus said, turn the other cheek. While my descriptions are very simplistic explanations of an entire belief system, it is, in its simplest form, the gist of it. Christians can receive atonement. They can be forgiven for their sins if only they believe in God and ask for forgiveness. I do not identify as a Christian, so therefore, what am I to do when people wrong me or I have done wrong myself? I like to think I am a humanist. I operate in the realm of logic and that which is moral. And if you are familiar with the gaming system of Dungeons and Dragons, all characters must choose an alignment. In real life, I am chaotic good. You can look that definition up later. So recently, when I was hurt by someone's words, their attitude, their evil, and their ugliness, how did I respond? About a month ago, I pulled into the drive-thru at the bank. I had endorsed my check I was excited to get, Christmas money, and I sent the tube through and I waited in line. The teller popped up on the screen and reminded me I needed to send my license. Oops. I waited a bit more, but it was taking much longer than it should have, much longer. I could see the person behind me in my rear view getting annoyed. We were boxed in. Sorry. I couldn't think for the life of me what the problem could be. And then after what felt like a lifetime, the teller came back on the screen. She explained that she couldn't cash my check. She was short in her tone and awkward. When I asked why, she said she would have to call the person who wrote the check to verify. I tried to keep my patience and politely explain that my father wrote the check, his last name is the same as mine, etc., etc. I don't see why this is a problem. Then she doubled back and said, well, your license is expired. Well, again, I attempted to patiently explain that I was aware of this and I would gladly supply her another form of ID. My license has been expired for a year. Thank you, COVID. She continued to ask me a barrage of questions. Do I actually bank here? When was the last time I came into bank? And at this point, other things I can't really remember. And then she went off the screen for quite some time. Now I'm really irritated. Finally, she came back on the screen with yet another reason she couldn't cash my check. Yes, she had to call the person who wrote it because the check was, quote, out of sequence. She disappeared again. At this point, I'm livid because I can sense that something isn't right and I'm being jerked around. I called my mother and I explained what was happening. Sometime later, the tube finally came back through and I had my cash and ID. The teller came on the screen, said she spoke with my father and sorry for the inconvenience. Have a nice day. If you drove down Lee Street East that day, then it's likely you heard a raging scream from inside a vehicle. Not a scream of terror or fear, rage. Rage at the realization of what had just happened to me and that I was a victim of someone's fear and prejudice. I had just encountered one of the most ugly, cruel, vile experiences known to humanity. Someone was making a decision and treating me a certain way based on the color of my skin and how I looked. I came to this conclusion after my parents told me about the conversation they had with the teller and our compared experiences. Not to mention, the whole ordeal felt wrong as soon as she started asking me completely unrelated questions. And as I felt and watched her face over the screen and listened to her tone, that I was being treated like a criminal. This was ugly, and I see red when I'm angry. And it is not an emotion that I welcome often. But how do I forgive and find peace and move on? I believe in karma. I do not wish any ill will upon this woman, but I have faith that the universe finds balance. Will I be around to see it? Most likely not. But it gives me comfort knowing that someday, somewhere, there may be an instance when karma visits that woman and she knows. And if she doesn't, it's not my place to control her destiny, but it is my place to attempt to control my own. I forgive her. I am sorry for her. I know that her actions are based in fear and ignorance. I hope for that woman that maybe she learned something that day and it will steer her in a different direction in the future. How does a non-Christian find grace? I find grace in love. I love you, even if I've never met you. Love is my religion, and it will guide me and support me through every hardship. Though he mentions the Christian God, this line from a Will Smith song stays with me in times of hurt. Let God deal with the things they do, because hate in your heart will consume you too. I can be down with that. I make it my own, and I will not allow the ugliness of other people to consume or control me. Sometimes this is hard. I cry, I can scream, but at the end of the day, that's the lesson. Love them and let them go. What will you do the next time someone hurts you? Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. I hate not being able to hug you when you share vulnerable things, you know? So looking forward to the day when we can hug each other again. So each week we light a second candle for those affected by COVID-19, which is all of us and some of us more than others. So as I light this candle, I invite you to share in the chat box on Zoom or the comment section on Facebook who or what you are holding on your heart. What is on your mind today? What do you want held in the hearts of this congregation? I know I am holding all of those facing health challenges in our community as we battle this HIV crisis, as we watch our beloveds struggle with things like the long-term effects of COVID, recovery from surgery. We hold so many beloveds in our hearts. And I'm holding in my heart all those affected by the ongoing bad immigration policies of our country, all the children especially who continue to be harmed by our country's xenophobia, and all the civilians affected by the US bombing in Syria. And indeed, yes, Deborah, holding all of those who've experienced the contempt of prejudice and who are affected every day by racism. Beth, we join you in holding your younger sister, Ellie, as she struggles with addiction. And we hold some joys too, joys of news of new vaccines, the joy that we find even in these difficult times with those close to us. Deborah, there's no joy like a laughing baby grandgirl and a wise teenaged grandgirl. It's there. And we hold Stephanie, we join you in holding your sister and nephew as they travel. May they be safe. May they be well. May we all be safe and well. And I invite you now into a time of prayer or meditation. I invite you perhaps to settle your feet in the floor. I wish to settle your hands in your lap. I invite you to close your eyes if that is helpful for you, or to focus your eyes on a candle flame. I offer you these words by Reverend Laura Horton Ludwig. Spirit of life and love, light within and without, mystery from which we have all emerged, within which we live and die, be with us now as we allow ourselves to drop into the silence and stillness at the center of our being. As people of faith, we seek to live in a spirit of love, a spirit of community, justice, and peace. And yet, in so many corners of the world, both far and near, we see divisiveness and hate. If we look deep within ourselves, perhaps we will even find these energies there too. We struggle to respond to the outer world and our inner dramas in ways that manifest love. At times, we may fear that love will not be strong enough. At times, we may question whether love really is at the root of all things. In this world with so much struggle and suffering and discord, we may struggle to hold on to our faith in love, knowing that if all things come from the one source we proclaim, that source must somehow hold hate as well as love, violence as well as peace, evil as well as good. This is the mystery within which we live and die. These are the questions that haunt our days and nights, and yet we are not without hope. Our struggles and our questions testify to our longing for peace, for love. Our very longings are born out of that mystery we dare to address as spirit of life and love. In the stillness and silence of our own heart, we read the imprint of love, created not by our own will, but planted there for us to discover. By what or whom we cannot know, and yet it is there, a clue, a talisman, a beacon, a light within. May it keep hope alive, even as we dwell in mystery. May it guide us all as we seek to act wisely and well. May it help us to be vessels of compassion for one another and for our world. I invite you, with all of our hopes and joys and fears and sorrows, to breathe for a moment in the quiet, together as we are apart. Amen. Blessed be. And please join me in singing along to our meditative hymn of the month, Ubi Caritas.
Ubi caritas et amor, ubi caritas Deus ibi est, ubi caritas et amor, ubi caritas Deus ibi est, ubi caritas et amor, ubi caritas Deus ibi est, ubi caritas et amor, ubi caritas Deus ibi est, ubi caritas et amor, ubi caritas Deus ibi est.
So we tend to talk a lot about our Unitarian roots, about the Transcendentalists and the Puritans and the Humanists. And today I wanted to talk about the other part of our religious heritage, the Universalists, specifically about universalism and sin, which is an intense word, right? Sin, it's loaded. Kate mentioned the conversation that was happening on my Facebook wall the other day, and people have a lot of feelings about this word. It's really, really loaded, especially loaded in this country. I feel like we can't talk about this without acknowledging that this country, where a version of Christianity that is super focused on sinfulness and the question of sin and redemption is the dominant religion. The question of sin has been weaponized here from the very beginnings of colonization on this continent. You can't talk about what the United States of America is without talking about sin and sinfulness and how the idea of sinning has been used to hurt people, right? Like our Universalist forebears wanted to change the national religious discourse away from sinfulness to focus on the idea of a loving God and universal salvation, reconciliation. Kind of the stereotypical image of a universalist, of an early universalist, is someone just like riding through the countryside with their Bible in the hand, declaring the good news that people aren't going to hell, right? They wanted to spread the good news of love, of inherent goodness. And yeah, they didn't always agree on every part of this message. There was a whole thing back in the day, back in the 19th century, a big split over ultra universalism versus restorationism, which to most modern Unitarian Universalists seems like a silly enough squabble that one year we actually had joking ribbons at General Assembly. You know, when you have a name tag and then you have ribbons on it, and somebody made joking ribbons that said either ultra universalists and restorationists, as if we were like picking teams for a kickball game, right? But if you've not heard these terms before, basically the ultra universalists did not believe that there was punishment after death. And the restorationists thought there was still work to do in the afterlife to achieve reconciliation with a loving God. So folks like Elihan Winchester, a noted restorationist, said this wouldn't last more than 50,000 years, but that some folks will need the full 50,000 to achieve that reconciliation. So the key central idea, right, of universalism, of universal salvation, is of no eternal damnation. And this was a transformational idea wherever you fell in that 19th century debate over restorationism or ultra universalism. Because when you let go of the idea of sin as something that can curse you to eternal damnation, your focus begins to shift as a religious person, right? When you focus on love as the central idea of a religious tradition, the idea that all are loved, that every person is loved and has inherent worth and dignity, you tend to shift away from yelling about sin a lot, from labeling others as sinners, because what does that even mean if you believe in universal salvation? You start to shift towards ideas about redemption, about restorative justice and redeeming love, and the hard work of forgiveness. The question becomes not how do we prevent eternal damnation, but how do we make this life a better one? I think it makes sense that we 21st century Unitarian Universalists don't talk about sin a whole lot, both because of that shifts and we don't use the language of sin and sinning much because it is a concept that's done so much harm, that's tied to so much of the ugliest things in our history, from homophobia and reproductive injustice to our toxic diet culture and eugenics-inspired beauty standards, right? Like our theme of the month was ugliness. When we start talking about ugliness, all this stuff comes up about the difference between what's been labeled pure and pretty and what's been labeled ugly and sinful, right? That ugly as sin has gotten tied in with all these things that we say about people's bodies, right? So we reject that. All bodies are beautiful, right? Our faces are not an indication of our character, right? Ugh. As Billy said online yesterday, the concept and the language of sin has been used as a tool to spread hate and justify harm towards others, used by certain faith groups to imply that humans are inherently bad, broken, dirty. And the very concept can feel abusive. It can be used abusively, right? Especially think about how we talk about it with children. And I wish everyone had had the sort of experience Misha talked about in her Sunday school class of being told that she was loved no matter what she does. Because I know that not all children are told that, and that breaks my heart. You may have experienced something like this in your own life, this concept of sinfulness being used harmfully. One of the things I love about Unitarian Universalism is that we focus on love, as Kate talked about, and our principle of inherent worth and dignity as a direct counter to abusive tactics of labeling humans as sinful, right? That doesn't mean we have no ideas about sin and evil in our theology. We Unitarian Universalists and we of the religious left, of the liberal religious traditions, tend to be more comfortable talking about abstract evil, abstract things that are more like collective sins. We end up talking about those a lot. We Unitarian Universalists are getting increasingly comfortable about looking at how those collective sins are evil, right? We are pretty clear on the fact that enslavement and kidnapping of African Americans and African American folk was evil, that the ongoing genocide of Native Americans is evil. The xenophobia that puts kids into cages on our border, yes, even under Democratic presidents like the one we have right now, and there are things we can be doing about that. Those are systemic evils that benefit some and harm many, that privilege some and cause trauma and suffering for others, and ultimately hurt all of us. As our children's program Hero of the Month, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, put it, we are all bound up together in one great bundle of humanity, and society cannot trample on the weakest and feeblest members without receiving the curse on its own soul. Right? This curse doesn't land in an abstract way, right? We heard from Kate how this is not an abstract, like, curse on the nerve surface. It hurts people. It's collective, but it also something that affects individuals and that each of us has to deal with. Each of us has to deal with. As my colleague, Reverend Molly Hirsch-Gordon, pointed out in an article on UU World, the reality of collective sin is that we live amid systems we did not personally create. On the other hand, if we take the web of life seriously, untangling our individual roles and social sins becomes just as difficult. Effectively, the depth of our interconnection guarantees that all sin is both individual and collective. And though sin may be conceived of in liberal theology as systemic and abstract, it always plays out upon real people and their flesh. The reality of collective sin is the plunder of our bodies, to use Ta-Nehisi phrase, bodies that starve, bodies that face mass incarceration and mass extinction, bodies that burn and break. And if liberal theology is to be liberating, it must hold in tension both the systemic and the particular. We are each responsible in the sense that we cannot fail to respond, and our response cannot be abstract or universal. So, we need to talk about the big systemic things hurting all of us, right? And we need to confront those in some systemic ways. Right? I believe that bit of our faith tradition. And we also have to talk about this at the level of what of each of us and our community can be doing to address harm. This is why we're doing the work on facing ways that racism is impacting real people in our community, right? Both in the sometimes subtle ways, the microaggressions, or just the overt racism moments like Kate had this week, and in the ways that it's keeping people out of safe housing, that it's keeping people from getting food, that it's keeping people from getting safe and fair education, right? So all of that can be useful ways of thinking about sin. And I think it's worth mentioning that while the language of sinning has been used for harm, it can be a useful concept, this language about how we sin, because classically sinning meant to miss the mark, right? To miss the mark. To sin is to miss the mark, or to separate the self from God, or separate from what we consider holy, or from community, or as Mary Beth put it, from our authentic selves, right? That we can separate or ignore that still small voice within, like we talked about in that service about Thoreau last month, right? I I say useful because it is good to remember that we are going to sometimes miss the mark, sometimes find ourselves separated from our authentic selves, sometimes miss the small voice within. It is useful to live with that understanding, perhaps, that we will mess up sometimes and that we can try to do better when we find that we have messed up, right? I think this is one of my personal goals always, is to take in the information when I've missed the mark, when I've been part of the harm, the big collective sin, and to look and always find out new ways that I'm doing that, right? And on the other hand, we have people who choose over and over to do harm, right? Like the flip side of Reverend Molly's argument comes out for me when we talk about folks like Rush Limbaugh, which a lot of us were talking about last week, right? That because here's the thing, if everyone is loved, if we believe that everyone is loved and held in love, we also aren't necessarily responsible for loving every single other person. We can believe in forgiveness and the power of forgiveness, and we also don't have to always forgive everyone, right? Forgiving can be a beautiful part of a person's spiritual practice. And Kate, I love how you shared about that. And that's gorgeous and beautiful and a thing to do. And I also want to be clear that our theology says that you don't have to give out cheap grace. Grace isn't cheap. Grace is something that's about mutuality and showing love to each other. If someone is choosing again and again and again to deny their own inherent worth and dignity and the worth and dignity of others, is ignoring the still small voice that calls to us of loving acceptance and work for justice and equity and all that is beautiful and liberating. We don't have to be nice about them and who they were. As one of my colleagues put it, Rush Limbaugh spent his life and talent debasing the image of the divine in himself, and every AIDS patient he mocked, every immigrant he vilified, every culture war he stoked to cause suffering and pain in order to satisfy the massive festering wound of his ego. Being a religious tradition of love doesn't necessarily mean being a religion of niceness. It means being truthful, being on the path of the free and responsible search for truth and meaning, right? Respecting someone's dignity means being clear about who that person is while they were alive and honest about who that person was after they die. Yeah, I want to be clear about that we can set limits on love, because love is this powerful force for change, and it does have limitations. And love is also about setting limitations. That's why we have a covenant of good relations as a congregation, because what we're doing together as people is not being perfect, but is helping each other to be better and being honest with each other about how our actions affect each other and trying to make our congregation as safe as possible, especially for those among us who are vulnerable to harm, right? That part of loving is setting limitations and acknowledging love's limitations. Many people who have done harm have been loved and did harm anyway, right? We are all loved ultimately. Unitarian Universalism, as we practice it now, is focused on this life, on making the world we all live in now more fair and just and equitable and loving and liberatory, on love as a force for redemption and reconciliation, on the covenants we live out with each other. Remember that our 7 principles we hold are actually a covenant. This is a covenant we hold and that we go back to and we change and we try to make more libertarian loving as we go forward. That's why we keep changing the language. That's why we're considering an 8th principle about facing racism in our institutions. So yeah, right? Thinking about universalism, thinking about the hateful actions of some people, the intentionally and hurtful actions of powerful and influential people, makes me think sometimes surely it's gonna take up to 50,000 years for some to reconcile with love, right? I think I wore an ultra universalist ribbon at General Assembly, but when I think about the harm some have done, I super get where the restorationists are coming from, right? I think about some of the people who've harmed so many loving lives in this country, and I think, yeah, it might take you a big chunk of that 50,000 years to reconcile with love. I don't know what I think about the afterlife, but I get the restorationist some days. And when I think about what Kate shared about her experiences, right? Like folks who act out this racist narrative we have in our nation are being harmed by our collective sins of racism and misogyny and whatnot. And we honor that and we want them to know better. And also they are choosing words and actions that are causing harms to another human, to Kate, who we know deserves better. So what do? We can't always change the actions of others. We can hope for them for better things. We can try to create more loving action in the world, and we can work on ourselves, right? I hope ultimately that we can call each other in to love, that reconciling with love is something we can do in the here and now, that we can work on saying to each other, hey friend, missed the mark on that one, caused me some hurt there. And people can hear that the same way we hear it when we step on someone's foot. Not as, oh, I'm a sinner, but it's, oh, I've sinned. Oops, missed the mark, right? Like missing the mark. It's like you've an archer and you missed the target, right? We're all going to miss the target sometimes when we're practicing archery. We're all going to miss the mark sometimes when we're practicing being loving people. We can see this missing the mark not as a shame thing, not as a label. And I hope this is one of the saving messages of our tradition, that we don't believe anyone is condemned to live out the worst in themselves, or that our worst needs to define us, that nothing can ultimately keep us separated from love, right? And it can be useful to feel guilt if that helps us to do better, guilt over harm we've caused, but no one needs to live in shame. Right? We are not sinners, but beautifully imperfect humans with a capacity to love, capacity to live with so much love. I hope that we stay committed in the long haul, holy work for which there is no one right path or easy way of building a world of fewer evils and more love. Together we can find a way. Because ultimately, it doesn't matter much if you use the word sin or evil, whether you are an ultra-universalist or a restorationist, or whether you have no conception of the afterlife at all or undecided, right? We are not a tradition concerned with orthodoxy or heresy. You're not a heretic if you are an ultra-universalist. You're not a heretic if you're a restorationist. You're not a heretic if you're an atheist, right? That's not what we're about. We are a tradition concerned with living our lives well, making things better than we found them, acting from a place of love, addressing the ugliness of the systemic evils we are part of, and not denying truth, not denying love, right? Striving to prevent harm and to help each other along this path we are co-creating. And dear ones, whatever brought you to Unitarian Universalism, I hope you are with us in the work of love. I hope you know yourself to be loved. I hope that our community is a place of transformation and healing and love far into the future. So please join me in singing along once more to hymn number 18, What Wondrous Love.
What wondrous love is this, oh my soul, oh my soul. What wondrous love is this, oh my soul. What wondrous love is this that brings my heart such bliss and takes away the pain of my soul, and takes away the pain of my soul. When I was sinking down, sinking down, sinking down, when I was sinking down, sinking down, when I was sinking down beneath my sorrow's ground, friends to me gathered round, oh my soul, oh my soul. Friends to me gathered round, oh my soul. yes, unto the end I will sing. I will sing with thanks unto the end. I will sing.
And we extinguish this chalice, that not the light and warmth of love may it guide us in every day. In the words of one of Universalist preacher John Murray's biographers, Alfred S. Cole, "Go out into the highways and byways. Give people something of your new vision. You may possess a small light, but uncover it, let it shine. Use it to bring more light and understanding to the hearts and minds of men and women. Give them not hell, but hope and courage. Preach the kindness and everlasting love." And remember, dear ones, you are enough, just exactly as you are, and you are not alone. Blessed be.